Fear is a lot like fire. Actually, there is a fire triangle. There's also a fear triangle, meaning there's three elements that make fire expand and grow. Same thing in fear. There's three elements, or a fear triangle. They work very, very similar. And those elements are fuel, heat, and oxygen. So let's look at those things. In a normal fire, fuel, of course, is your tinder, your wood, your logs. Heat is the spark, the match, the fire, the flame. And then the oxygen, of course, is air. Air's got to circulate. And the better air circulates, the more oxygen there is, the more explosive the fire will be. So if you can combine those three things, you'll have a great fire. If you combine those three things, you also have great fear. And fear can dominate your life. Because fear, like fire, has one purpose. It wants to steal, kill, and destroy. It wants to destroy your relationships, your peace of mind, your attitude, your health, your life. It wants to take everything you have away, just like fire does. Uncontrolled fire wants to destroy and consume everything. So firefighters are taught, if you want to stop most or the majority of the damage that fire can do, is take away one of the elements, one of the pieces of the triangle. So how do we do that with fear? Here are the three elements of the fear triangle, which is the same as the fire. It's the fuel, it's the heat, it's the oxygen. But here's what they are for you. Fuel is your thought process. It's what you're thinking about. And what you're thinking about is derived from who you're listening to and what you're watching and reading. So for me, as an example, I learned 30 years ago, I got to turn the news off. I don't watch the news because it's a trigger. It is fuel for me. I'm adding logs onto that bad boy. I got a wildfire going when I watch the news because it creates a lot of anxiety and anger and fear in my life. And it affects everything. So I've learned I got to limit the fuel. I've got to be careful what I'm thinking about. So I got to start thinking what I'm thinking about. Number two, the heat, that flame, that fire, that there is your emotions. Do you know that when you get into fear, when you start adding some fuel onto your fire and you start thinking about it, let's say you start thinking about, because of COVID, your finances are down. And then all of a sudden you start imagining all the worst case scenarios that could possibly happen. I'm going to be homeless. My kids are going to live in on the street. I'm not going to have anything. And we keep reliving those things like a movie over and over in our minds, and our emotions become red hot. Ah, boy, you're priming yourself for a wildfire. And then three is oxygen. And oxygen to us on the fear triangle is our complaining, blaming, rationalization, whining, and making excuses. We're blowing on the embers because we want a bigger flame. So we start complaining and making excuses and all this stuff, and we're adding more oxygen to the fire. Those three elements together become very powerful, and our fire or fear will become uncontrollable. And that's where we get a lot of our anxiety. So here's two tips that I have used very successfully to help me with fear and anxiety. Number one, trust God. Now I know you're saying, what the heck does that mean? Here's what I mean. Fear is a spiritual force. You better have a spiritual partner if you want to fight that fire. Because as firefighters know, fire fights fire. If you want to put a fire out, you fight it with fire. You want to put fear out, you've got to fight it with faith. You've got to have a partner that's bigger than the fear that you're facing. You got to trust that God has already won the war, and that you might lose some of the battles, but the war is done. And here's how you do by trusting him. Because he tells us in Philippians 4:8 what to do. He says, think on these things. Or your thoughts, the fuel. Add this fuel in. Think on things that are good and pure, that are holy. They give you peace. They're noble. Think on things that are loyal. Think on those things. Stop thinking about all the fear, the finances, and all the worst case scenario stuff. You're taking the fuel away. And then number two, take action. Because once you eliminate fear, you eliminate being paralyzed. Fear paralyzes us. And then unbelievably, when you do those two things, you become Wonder Man and Wonder Woman. You are unstoppable. The most powerful force in the universe is a man or woman who's trusting God, meaning changing their thought process, and they're taking action. Prove me wrong. I dare you. My name is Ed Carcarey. Man, I'd love to connect with you. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me on my webpage at edcarcarey.com. Find your passion. Find your life.